You're listening to Season 10 of Mobile Suit Breakdown, a weekly podcast covering the entirety of sci-fi mega franchise Mobile Suit Gundam, from 1979 to today.
This is episode 10.26, Guillotine Festival, and we're your hosts. I'm Tom, reminding you to check out the Artists Alley when you're at Guillotine Fest. I know most of the big corporate guillotine companies are in the expo hall, but small, independent guillotines are the lifeblood of the guillotine fandom.
And I'm Nina, new to Victory Gundam, and I hate to admit this, but I see Katagina's point. It's much easier to think fondly of an old flame or an ex if you're confident you're never going to see them again. Mobile Suit Breakdown is made possible by our paying subscribers on Patreon. Thank you all, and special thanks to our newest patrons, Ethan H. and Cinders. You keep MSB Genki. Once this episode publishes, we will be on a brief hiatus. We need time to design this season's merch, to work on side projects, and to finish a few of the more complex research piece ideas that we've had. Hopefully somewhere in there, we will also get some rest. We will be back with the early access release of episode 10.27 on September 7th. And in that episode, we would like to address some viewer questions and comments. Rather than waiting until the very end of the series, the halfway point seems like a good place. Do you have any questions about the show, about our coverage of the show, our thoughts and impressions, comments you'd like to share? Please email them to us at hosts@gundampodcast.com.
This week, Victory episode 26, Uso to Maria, or Uso and Maria. The episode was written by Sonoda Hideki, storyboarded by Kase Mitsuko, and directed by Gundam veteran Sekita Osamu, with Nishimura Nobuyoshi in charge of animation. Now that he has Queen Maria Pure Armonia firmly in hand, none of the Zanskar soldiers are willing to attack Uso, except Chronicle. He would rather see his sister dead by his own hand than allow her to be used like a pawn by these impudent rebels. The Queen now proves a hindrance. Uso is unable to fight back against the prince's furious assault. Seeing the boy in danger, Peggy throws her own badly damaged Gun-Easy into Chronicle's path, and is cut down. Grief overwhelms Uso, and he collapses. Only the Queen's plea for mercy saves him from a vengeful Chronicle. Odello and the others take advantage of the chaos to slip through the port's defenses and into the colony proper. There they meet an old friend of the Highland families, who offers to keep them hidden from the authorities. Uso and Marbet are held together in a dark cell. Peggy's death has left them both distraught, but Marbet reminds her young friend that Peggy wanted him to live on and keep fighting. He must not give in to despair. They are interrupted by the arrival of a guard. It is time for Uso's interrogation. When Marbet demands to go in his place, the guard clobbers her with the butt of his rifle. Enraged, Uso attacks. And between the two of them, the pilots are able to disable the guard, and Uso bolts out of the cell. He races through the unfamiliar corridors of this facility, unaware that he is being monitored by security cameras. Before long, he encounters Chronicle and, to his shock, Katagina Luz, wearing the uniform of a Bespa soldier. Uso throws himself at Peggy's killer, but Chronicle neatly sidesteps the attack and sends the still handcuffed 13-year-old boy flying with a ferocious uppercut. His escape attempt foiled, Uso soon finds himself in the back of a limousine, accompanied by Chronicle, Tassilo, and the Queen. By chance or fate, they are bound for the San Jose factory where his friends are hiding. This factory refurbishes captured mobile suits for the government, and they've been asked to repair Uso's victory in preparation for a festival the following day. Uso will be left there to answer any questions they may have about the machine. The others leave him alone with the Queen for just a brief moment, but she takes the opportunity to ask about his relationship with Shakti, and beg his help convincing the unwilling princess to accept her new role in life. When Uso warns her that Shakti despises the guillotine and those who wield it, the Queen admits that she feels the same way, but cannot end the practice without help. With Shakti as her heir, with Uso to help her, Perhaps then it might be possible. They are interrupted. It is time for the Queen to leave. She presses a bag of sweets into his hands and returns to the car with her brother and Tassilo. As they drive away, the captain informs the horrified siblings that Uso will be executed by guillotine during tomorrow's festival. Back at the factory, Uso's future is looking a good deal brighter. His friends make short work of the guards, and the bag of candies from the Queen turns out to include a hand-drawn diagram of the festival, with Shakti's location clearly marked. A plan begins to form. But for now, Uso will return to Imperial custody. The sun sets, the night passes, and the time for the festival arrives. Uso's Gundam and a captured Ganizi stand like statues in the plaza. Maria takes the stage to rapturous cheers from the crowd. Soldiers at the front chant, "Zanskar! Zanskar!" Behind them, a gaggle of sick and wounded civilians wait in hope of a miracle, and just behind them are Shakti and the rest. Maria congratulates the victorious Muttermasugan fleet and gives her blessings to the Empire and all beneath its banner. As children are born from their mother, she intones, "Gather before me and rejoice." She opens her arms, and an immense, warm light emanates from her body. As it washes over the crowd, their bodies miraculously heal. The blind regain their sight. The paralyzed can move again. The citizens fall to their knees in supplication, but Shakti stands, not sure what to think about this demonstration of her mother's power. With everyone distracted, Warren is able to sneak up to Suzy and Shakti and lead them both away. As the light fades, Maria collapses into the arms of her attendants. This blessing has exhausted her. She cedes the stage to Kagati. It is time for those who threaten the Queen's heart to meet the guillotine. Uso and Marbet are dragged onto stage. Kagati calls them Federation assassins, here on a mission to murder Maria. To everyone's surprise, especially his own, the condemned are joined by a third, Captain Tassilo Vago. Like Farah Griffin before him, his failures on the battlefield have sealed his doom. The captain is to be first into the machine, but before the guillotine can begin its deadly work, the captured mobile suits in the plaza start moving. Unbeknownst to everyone, Odello and Tomasz have been inside their cockpits this whole time, just waiting for the right moment. In the confusion, Uso and Marbet manage to get free and take over the mobile suits, and just in time to meet the first Zanskar mobile suit arriving on the scene. It is a new machine, based on the old Shako. The pilot is a new enemy who was once an old friend. Katajina Luz has found her battlefield. Well, it turns out that Peggy was saved by the bell more than anything else. If last week's episode had run on another 5 minutes, she would have died in it instead of here.
Another one bites the dust.
Yeah. Once again, she gets the thinnest amount of characterization. She is allowed to appear on screen and speak lines, and that was all she wrote.
One by one, the Shrikes are trotted out to teach Uso some important lesson or two about life, and then killed off to cement the importance of that lesson for him, and then we move on to another Shrike and another lesson. We haven't done an in memoriam for any of them yet.
What would we even say about most of them? Like, what individual of them got enough characterization that we could actually come up with something to say about them? We started doing the in memoriams way back in First Gundam in like episode 3, I think, because there were characters who were capturing our attention, capturing our interest, who gave us so much, and then the show didn't seem to respect their deaths in the way that we wanted it to. So we decided to offer them that instead. But with the Shrikes, the show gives them so much more attention, so much more respect after they die than it gives them while they're alive.
I assume that at some point I will want to talk about the Shrikes again, and that might be an in memoriam for all of them as a group if none of them survive this. Or it might just be towards the end of the show. There are certainly other things to be said, in particular about shrikes as a symbol in Japanese, like poetry and folk song that could be interesting and relevant. But the pace at which they are killed off would have had us doing in memoriams every 2 or 3 episodes, and they would have been awfully thin. So I think it does make sense to wait.
The show has been profligate with its characters, wasteful. It's the only way I can describe them. There are so many characters, and very few of them are given any kind of real characterization at all. Which is not to say that there are no well-developed characters. I've been consistently impressed with Warren and Odello and Susie, even Carlman, Flanders, Haro, Shakti and Uso, of course, Katajina, Chronicle, but...
I made a face when he said Katajina, but we'll come back to that.
But the Shrikes, Oliver, Marbet, Gomez, Ness, Khufu, Stryker, I bet you don't even remember Stryker, the rotating carousel of Zanskar pilots. We've now had enough episodes that I'm beginning to get a sense for Tassilo Vago, and I mean, that's pretty cool that he has emerged from the shadows to be a character. But this goes back to what I was saying last week about Victory, all action, go, 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 constantly, not much time taken to develop the more tertiary characters. And that's a shame, because a lot of what made First Gundam feel so special was people like Lieutenant Dren or Cameron Bloom, Slager Law.
Side characters who felt like people.
Right.
Who had personality and presence.
By now, Marbet has been in more episodes than Ryu Jose, who I think is probably her closest analog in First Gundam, as is, I think, demonstrated fairly well in this episode in that scene of her and Uso in jail together, and her telling Uso, you have to eat, you have to live, you have to be ready for the next action, whatever it is. And that is, I think, a pretty clear callback to Ryu Jose telling Amuro when they're all imprisoned by the Federation on Luna 2, you have to eat. Eating for a soldier is like loading your gun. You can't fight if you're not in good physical condition. But anyway, as much as I like Marbet, and as much as I feel like Marbet has been given some development and some more development in the last couple of episodes, I don't know that I have a grasp on her the way I did on Ryu when he died.
It's gotten harder and harder for them to give us that as the cast has expanded and as more of the focus has shifted to the kids.
And I don't mean to say that you can't make a show where the central cast is very well characterized and the tertiary cast is extremely thin, but don't keep killing them off in purportedly tragic or heroic ways and expecting us to feel something about them if we don't know who they are. That's all. And for a team with such verve, with such unique character designs and a capacity to be fan favorites, the Shrikes have been let down by the narrative.
They've become a monolith rather than a collection of individuals.
They are the precious big sister with 1,000 faces.
You mentioned Katajina earlier. I almost, in frustration, feel as though she's not worth talking about anymore until more happens with her, because we get so little insight into her motivations or feelings that she's almost like a caricature of an evil woman.
I would have agreed with you up until the last scene of this episode, when she appears in her mobile suit, in her Zanskar pilot uniform, attacking Uso in the plaza. And she gives that little speech. She looks at the Gundam and she says, "This is your face now, isn't it? This is your face." And then she says this line about, like, memories are precious to us because the distance allows us to cherish them, but here you are standing in front of me, alive. And I realized, as she said that, Char has arrived. Katajina is our Char, with these grandiose battlefield philosopher statements that don't seem entirely related to what's going on. This is her. Everyone is reluctant to admit to them those mistakes caused by our youth. This is her. Blame this on the misfortune of your birth line. Like, this is the kind of stuff Char says. And if we view Katajina through the Char lens, through the masked rival lens, the cryptic antagonist, suddenly her character comes together for me. This is a person who has seen all of the same things that the protagonist has seen, who has perceived the same problems in the world, and has come to a conclusion about them and how to solve them that is so diametrically opposed that there is nothing for the two of them except to fight.
I would find that interesting and compelling if I thought that was all there was to it. But even though I can't quite place my finger on what it is, there is this added layer of sexism to Katajina's portrayal that makes it kind of feel gross. Maybe it comes down to that she appears to have completely gone back on everything she ever said because she fell in love with a man.
Uh-huh.
That she didn't really have any deeply held convictions. Her convictions are those of whoever she's in love with right now.
But long before she met Chronicle, she still said it's good that the people of Uig were massacred because of their corruption.
And she also said that once the Ligue Militaire became too strong, she couldn't support them anymore. And she also wasn't going to be bullied into fighting or taking a side.
See, I think in that period, between the Uig massacre and falling in with Chronicle, she's going through a period of self-rationalization. She's like realizing that she doesn't side with the Ligue Militaire, but that's in contrast to what her upbringing, what the conventional wisdom tells her is the right thing to feel in this moment. And so she's sort of trying out different explanations for why that is. First, oh, I'm opposed to war and fighting, but that's obviously not really the case. Then, oh, I don't respect the Ligue Militaire because they're a real army. No, that's not it, because then she sides with Zanskar, with Bespa. It's been a process of her working her way towards what she really believes via these way stations. The willingness to get into the mobile suit and fight reflects the power of a character's convictions. That's kind of always been the case. And even on the Camion, Katajina's willingness to take an active role and help out was a sign of her deepening convictions. Now that she's actually willing to pilot the mobile suit herself, that reflects, I think, the crystallization of everything she's gone through up until now.
When we first watched the episode, in that ending scene, your conclusion was that she wishes Uso were dead. Watching it again, I had the sense she simply wished they had never run into each other again.
Mm-hmm.
That if she were not confronted with him, she could remember him fondly. I have to imagine that on some level, she's also aware that he might have remembered her fondly were he not fighting her right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that his view of her and opinion of her and his sort of worshipful adoration is all but gone now. While she may never have encouraged or reciprocated that, she may have liked the idea of it at a remove.
Just as she had to go through a series of rationalizations on the way to becoming a member of the Yellow Jackets, Uso also had to go through a period of rationalizations in which he accepted by degrees what Katajina was becoming. Think back to that parting between the two of them when she gets on the shuttle to leave Earth, and then compare it now to their encounter in the hallway when he sees her in that Bespa uniform, or when he sees her in the plaza firing those beam rifles with reckless abandon and no regard at all for the possible collateral damage they'll cause. He is coming to see her just as she is coming to see herself. She's coming into focus. As for Uso himself, he just kind of does the Uso cycle here. He performs a risky maneuver, he mourns a dead friend / big sister, he blames himself for it, he kind of gets over it with the help of an older woman, into whose chest he throws himself to cry.
It's really her waist. And I actually thought that scene was really beautifully done.
Absolutely, it was.
There were quite a few scenes actually in this episode that I thought were well designed, well directed.
Agreed. This is the first episode in Victory directed by Sekita Osamu, who is a, real old guard Gundam episode director. He started out on First Gundam. In fact, he directed the episode where the Black Tri-Stars do the jet stream attack, and in which Matilda gets killed. So, not his first rodeo by any means. And then, after all of that, Uso gets disappointed by Katajina, and then horrified by the violence and the reckless disregard for civilian lives of the combatants. And that's what Uso does. That's the Uso character cycle that we've seen again and again and doesn't give any indication of changing. The really interesting stuff in this episode is all on the Zanskar side.
Since we've already talked about Uso and Katajina, maybe we should start with Chronicle. In some ways, Chronicle is still going through the process that you describe Katajina having gone through, because the man has no sense of irony. There are a lot of his lines this episode where my gut response is, pots, kettles?
Yeah, he's going through it. He is visibly hardening into a different person.
He calls Uso shameless for using the queen as a human shield. Did Vespa not kidnap a bunch of children to force their parents' compliance?
Chronicle himself, in fact, if you remember, used Count Oinyung as a human shield when he kidnapped him way back in the Camion arc.
Small point of interest that he identifies them as Federation forces now, not Ligue Militaire. Maybe just because they're fighting in space? I'm not clear on the differentiation there. And it seems as though he was very willing to risk Maria dying rather than risk the populace seeing her held as a hostage.
Yeah, his willingness to kill Maria, if it came to that, especially compared to everybody else in Zanskar holding back, is striking. But I'm really curious about whether he would be so willing to risk the queen, his sister's life, if not for having discovered Shakti, if not for there being an heir.
When some of the senior members of the military are watching security footage of Uso attempting an escape, and they are talking about, it seems that new types can come from Earth. Chronicle, shamelessly, with no sense of irony, if the Federation is training kids, they must have a horrible pilot shortage.
I think he's actually changing the subject because he is uncomfortable with them praising Uso. And this then leads to the later scene where after he's decked Uso, after he's punched Uso out, he has this little speech where he's just degrading Uso. He's like, you're nothing, you're nobody, you're just a kid drafted into the Ligue Militaire to make up for their lack of pilots. A statement that, under the circumstances, definitely says much more about Chronicle's own ongoing identity struggles.
And this conscript kid keeps beating you, so what does that say about you?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? You made a comment some episodes ago about, how would Chronicle feel if he realized that his, rival is this 12-year-old child?
And now he knows.
There's no denying it at this point, and that's a blow to his confidence. I think Chronicle is suffering from some severe insecurities, probably partially brought on by the fact that he's doing some dubious stuff here. He was willing to kill his sister. Is that the kind of thing the Chronicle from the beginning of the show would have condoned?
And while I understand it is his duty as a soldier to stop this escaping prisoner, he takes a certain amount of pleasure in punching Uso, a kid, much smaller than him, whose hands are bound really hard, and then insulting him as he lays on the floor. This is nasty bullying behavior.
Yeah. Also, I got the impression that he had gone to Earth in part to, get away from Zanskar politics, to get out of this swamp. Now he's back in space, he's back involved in the politics, and it's really doing a number on him morally. You already brought up the scene with the senior commanders talking about Uso.
Ooh, yeah.
When Tassilo talks about how dangerous Uso and the Ligue Militaire are.
Well, he sort of puts a different slant on it, right? It's not that they are so low on pilots they're training children. It's that their new mass production mobile suit is so easy to operate, even a child can do it.
And the high command, Fons Kagati, I think, accuses him of just trying to make excuses for his own failure. And this comment gets a visible reaction from Chronicle. He's clearly struck by it.
Chronicle and Wago both flinch at this statement.
And immediately afterwards, Chronicle asks if he can be excused. And considering Chronicle's treatment of Farah Griffin...
Right, I thought of the same thing.
Chronicle has just realized that Tassilo is a sinking ship, and he is scurrying off of it like a little rat. Like, he is getting out of there before he gets caught in the blast radius.
And not making any attempt to speak for Wago. And I don't know if that's just because he doesn't like Wago and he kind of liked Farah for reasons, or if he has decided that it's not worth risking himself.
We know that he has, at least on some level, an admiration for Fons Kagati. Admiration is perhaps the wrong word, but he told Katagina that he was trying to realize the matrilineal society as outlined by Fons Kagati. So even if he doesn't like Fons Kagati as a person, he still sees something there that he wants to emulate, sees something there that is worth pursuing. But then later, after he's been talking to Shakti, when Katagina is like, oh, you were so kind to her, he says, you can't rule children or the people by force alone. And this is a very Fons Kagati kind of thing to say, because look at the way Fons Kagati actually does rule the people. Blood, force, power in the form of the guillotine. On the other side, there's love, kindness, healing, represented by the queen.
All of the violence framed as necessary to protect the good things. Basically that our enemies would take all of this away from you. And so we have to destroy them completely if you want to keep receiving these benefits, these good things.
Over and over again, the people are children. Their leaders are their parents. They keep saying this. Maria, before she does her healing miracle, announces, because children are born from their mothers. Mwah,
gather to
energy.
Me, right? Like, gather to me.
Mommy will kiss it and make it better. Whatever it is.
I hadn't wanted to quite start talking about Maria yet. One last comment about Chronicle, and then I guess we can talk about Zanskar more generally and Maria specifically. But when Wago announces to Maria and to Chronicle that Uso will be executed by guillotine at the festival, Chronicle tries to dissuade him. He's willing to argue with Tassilo Wago. He was not willing to argue with Fons Kagati or Muterma. And he warns that executing Uso will have the opposite effect. It's unclear opposite of what. Because the locals, unless he thinks that them seeing a child be executed will cause some uneasiness in a few Zanskar hearts, the crowd seems pretty bloodthirsty by the time it gets to that point. I suppose it would put, their enemies even more firmly against them. But they don't seem all that interested in actually converting people. They're interested in total abject surrender by a conquered population.
Perhaps they think that killing Uso will demoralize the Ligue Militaire.
And Wago shuts down debate by saying this is an order from Fons Kagati.
It's pretty obvious now, by the end of this episode, that Maria is a figurehead. How much power she actually can wield is a little unclear, but she tells Uso that she opposes the use of the guillotine, and I don't think there's any serious reason to doubt her on that one. We have seen this dynamic play out many times in the past, both, in the real world, but also in Gundam. The idea of the figurehead monarch with the power behind the throne actually pulling the strings is one of Tomino's favorite tropes to deploy. Degwen for Giren, Minerva for Haman, Shar Aznable for Horst Harness and Kaisis Bayer, Bararona for Meitzer and Iron Mask.
I feel for her somewhat in this discussion with Uso because she almost certainly cannot prevent the use of the guillotine completely on her own. But has she tried to gather allies to herself, really? Has she tried to create a separate center of power? Has she tried to deny Kagati the use of her healing powers if he continues to do this? She is not entirely without leverage, and there's no indication that she's tried to use it.
I wonder if her thinking is that refusing to use her healing powers would be punishing the common people of Zanskar.
I mean, probably, but then they're no worse off than they were before she started doing the healings. She presumably has not been doing this forever.
But you can understand the psychology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just, I have somewhat more sympathy with Uso's frustration than with her hanging her head in sorrow, guilt, shame, and continuing to do nothing.
Sure.
She mentions that she believes the use of the guillotine could end when Shakti succeeds her. I don't entirely see how that follows, like what it is about the succession that would enable that to happen. But I wonder if there are shades, perhaps, of the Heian emperors who...
I was thinking of them as well.
Who didn't really... Because at the time, the ruling families would marry a member of their family to the emperor. The emperor was usually very young. It was actually his father-in-law who exercised authority and who governed. And then they would, by the time an emperor reached adulthood or, their 30s or 40s at the oldest, usually younger, usually their 20s or 30s, they would sort of force them to retire, ceding power to another child emperor who would then be married to another ruling family's daughter, and the thing goes on and on.
And, seems apropos to point out that part of the reason why that system developed the way it did, with the in-laws of the emperor exercising the real power in the empire, was because of the matrilocal marriage that they practiced. So, if you are a Fujiwara lord, for instance, and you marry your beautiful daughter to the emperor, her kids live in your house. Her kids, the imperial princes who will go on to become emperor, are raised by you and your family, not by the imperial clan.
Until they were older and it was judged that they needed to start learning about court life.
And so the age at which an emperor gets enthroned gets progressively younger and younger, and therefore they are more and more in the power of their maternal family.
And so perhaps she thinks that once she retires, that's when she will actually be able to exercise any power and control. And that might actually give Chronicle more power when it's his niece who is queen rather than his sister.
I mean, again, doing the Heian era thing of the retired emperor setting up their own, bureaucracy and running things from their, retirement. I mean, there was a period that we refer to as the era of rule by the retired emperors. And then there would be trouble because of the rate at which emperors were being retired for political reasons. There would be multiple retired emperors competing over who got to be the one who was actually driving things. And a big part of this is that they were being retired as soon as they reached maturity. So by the time they were adults capable of developing their own political power bases, they were already forced to retire. Mm-hmm. But also part of it is that the emperor's schedule is busy. The emperor is constantly doing all of these ceremonies and religious rituals. They don't have time for politics. Maria, if she's constantly doing these revival healing marathons and giving these big speeches, she's exhausted. She doesn't have time to build a competing political apparatus. So if Shakti could just take the reins and start doing these healings, then Maria could maybe make some inroads against Fons Kagati. Or at least that's what she's hoping.
Do you think that when she describes Uso as having a great power for good, she just means he could convince Shakti to take over for me?
Possible. Or she's working on that other level and she's looking for chess pieces. She is accumulating powerful agents.
This leads to one of the big story continuity issues with the episode, which is Uso's friends rescuing him.
When they're at that factory?
Yeah.
The one owned by Muscular Mancha?
Yes.
Jacked Mancha?
Yes.
Bigger Mancha?
Are you done interrupting me yet?
Definitely not. But please, go on. Give me more opportunities.
She gives him some paper-wrapped candies. The paper turns out to be a diagram of the public square in which this festival is going to take place, including the position of the mobile suits, the guillotine, the crowd, and where Shakti will be. At this point, she does not know that they intend to execute Uso. Why has she given him this? Does she actually intend for him to rescue Shakti and get Shakti out of here? Has she actually, in truth, decided that she doesn't want Shakti to take over for her? She's saying that out loud because anybody could be listening, but what she actually wants is for Shakti to get away. It doesn't make sense for it to be to help Uso escape unless she thinks Uso will be there. And there's no indication that any prisoners were brought there except to be executed.
And she can't possibly know that the factory is full of Uso's friends who are ready to break him out of confinement.
And showing him weak points in colony security also seems like a here's how to escape. She is so shocked by Wago's announcement that Uso will be executed, and yet somehow thinks Uso will be able to get to the festival the next day, even though she thought he'd be in a jail cell. Oh man, the fact that the jail is just like an office park is so darkly funny to me.
Well, it's, I assume this is their equivalent of the Pentagon or something. Did you notice it's in the shape of a wheel? There's the internal axle, there are the 8 spokes, then there's the outer rim, which is like a road that circles it. I assume this is an intentional reference to the Dharma Chakra, like the 8-spoked wheel that is a symbol in both Buddhism and Hinduism, because this show loves deploying symbols of Buddhism and Hinduism for Zanskar. I'm sure there is some deeper significance there to be unpacked.
Her disappointment when she gets into the car and says that Uso refused to listen to her felt pretty silly. Like, you really think you're going to convince an enemy soldier after a 5-minute chat that he should switch sides? Because you promise that things will be better if he helps you. Really?
Or it's a performance for Chronicle, Tassilo, and the others.
Very possible. I frequently wonder how much of Maria's behavior is an act and how much of it is real. That little statement she makes before the healing is almost like an incantation, like a spell, and seems to have actually worked. A bunch of injured people pop up and say, I can see again, I can walk again.
Not that it's impossible to fake that kind of thing, especially with the resources of an entire government behind you, but I do think the implication is that she's really doing it. She is really using her space esper powers to heal these people.
The way people say thanks be to her, as though she is a god. Shakti seems as if she's just trying to wrap her head around this, whereas Susie flat out cannot believe it. It has to be fake. It has to be a lie. This cannot possibly be real. And then afterwards, she's panting and she collapses with exhaustion, and Chronicle apparently did not know that it was like this. My opinion of Chronicle declining moment by moment. Had no idea that when she healed people like this, it was to the point of exhaustion.
I wonder if Maria used to do this on a smaller scale. Like, before Chronicle left, we don't know how long he's been away. Would she heal, like, 1 person, 2 people? If you do it individually and more intimately, is it less exhausting than this sort of broadband blast of healing energy out into the cosmos? Also, what's the range on this? Like, obviously people at the festival were cured of some pretty severe ailments, but, like, if you're living in one of the apartment buildings across the way and you have a bit of a cold, does that go away?
They did put the obviously injured people at the front of the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody falls to their knees. Everybody falls to the ground in these waves of warm light.
As they're bathed in Mariovsky particles.
However, there are some indications of discontent even among the local populace. As bloodthirsty as the crowd is once the guillotine is trotted out, there is a, I will say, very agitated crowd at the bottom of the elevator to the port. Some of them even ask if there has been a coup d'etat at the port. If the military clearly already exercises most of the power, but to the population, there is this veneer that Maria is actually in charge. And if someone would say it out loud, then a lot of people have been saying, gossiping about, wondering if the military will out and out seize power for itself.
They have to see how powerful Fons Kagati and the military faction are. They love Maria. They tolerate him. It feels like a classic stern father, kind mother dichotomy.
And then the engineer who helps the Highland kids, because he knows their parents and whatnot, is in some small way doing what he can, even though he operates a facility that works directly for the military. And Warren realizes out loud, even here in Zanskar, some people are sick of the guillotine.
I do wonder what they're going to do with those 2 guards they knocked out. Because Uso then decides to go back.
That was the other continuity issue, because what do you say when those guards wake up? oh, some machinery hit you. Like,
Yeah.
what? And you can't tie them up and stash them somewhere because they're the ones who are supposed to take you back to jail.
Right.
And yeah, I wondered if maybe some of these scenes were supposed to happen in a different order and then got moved last minute without changing anything in the lines or the animation, because that order of events does not make sense.
It feels like the problem you get with a first draft script, where if you had time to do revisions, you would notice these logical problems and rewrite sections of the episode in order to fix them. But the sort of dramatic imperative of getting Uso and Marbet and Tassilo all up on that stage together, all on the verge of being fed into the guillotine, and then sudden reveal, here are these two mobile suits, and Odello and Tomasz are hidden inside of them, and suddenly there's a whole jailbreak in the middle of the festival. That's such a good scene that the necessity, the imperative of getting everybody into their places so that that scene can happen takes precedence over everything else.
I almost did not recognize Wago outside of uniform at first until they start listing his quote-unquote crimes. I was like, who's that guy?
I'm just like, who is this random Zanskar civilian they've dragged up here? Yeah.
You know, leopards eating faces, right? The same capriciousness that he demonstrated toward Farah for her failures is now being demonstrated toward him. And, you know, when it's his head on the block, literally, he apparently does not think that failure ought to be punishable by death, but he thought it well enough when it was Farah.
I wonder where that other Guneezy came from, the one at the festival. Like, did they repair Peggy's very badly damaged Guneezy in the space of just a day?
Or have a different captured one,
I guess that's possible.
I initially thought that the wounded at the front of the crowd were specifically going to be soldiers and war wounded, because that is not uncommon at political rallies during wartime, to be like, look at our brave soldiers and everything that they've been through for all of us, as kind of like a rallying of support and an opportunity to demonstrate to the soldiers that the public values them and their sacrifice. Also, it makes sense if you were going to do a big healing that you would do soldiers first. And then it wound up not being that, which slight missed opportunity, but maybe their soldiers are either totally fine or dead. And then the propaganda of people talking about, oh, the enemy pilots surrendered because they accepted Mariaism.
Little child being like, wow, cool robot.
Shh. We can't say that about enemy robots.
And yeah, again, propaganda moments. Uso and Marbet are recast as the Federation pilots who tried to assassinate the Queen.
And having just received this miraculous blessing from her, with the promise of more of that to come, Kagati has very little trouble rousing the crowd to bloodthirstiness.
It appears as a natural consequence or corollary to the ecstatic wonder that they feel from the blessing. To have the emotions raised to that extremely high pitch, it's then very easy to redirect them into that bloodthirst.
Especially when they cast, any and all enemies as threats to Maria and her power.
But I think when you see something so miraculous, so unbelievable, when you are in that state of awe, you are very susceptible to manipulation and to a kind of groupthink.
But even Kagati must realize, even the people pulling the behind-the-scenes strings and using Maria and manipulating the public, seem to be aware that it would be possible to go too far. They know they're going to trot out the guillotine, but the guillotine is not out in the square all the time. It's like hidden under this rising platform, and it's only brought out when they're going to use it. It's not omnipresent in people's lives. It's not a thing that is always physically there. They hide it away, and then they only trot it out once they have people in a receptive frame of mind or have a particular ostentatious use for it planned. We get the impression they used it very extensively, but they still hide it when they're not using it.
Yet that sense of restraint is absent when they go out into the colonies. When they go to Earth. when they go to foreign lands, they only bring the guillotine. They don't bring Mariaism. They don't bring the loving, healing, mystic queen. Only the fist.
Well, I believe you had a bit of a Freudian slip there, because that stems from them being the metropole and everything they conquer being a colony of theirs. And the metropole is supposed to receive the, benefits, the resources, the wealth of the colonies. The colonies are not really supposed to receive much of anything from the metropole. Certainly the center of big colonial projects will say, but we do all these great things for the locals, and that justifies us conquering them and denying them self-determination.
We build railroads that for some reason lead directly from the raw materials back to the ports that carry them to the factories in the homeland.
Right. We build an education system that we make sure philosophically justifies our position, and also so that we can take all the best and brightest from the colonies for ourselves and brain drain you further.
In exchange, we offer guillotines.
Cake or death, and we're out of cake.
And I think I mentioned this on a previous episode, but the French Empire did literally this with the guillotine.
In the colonies?
Oh, yeah. The guillotine was used extensively in Indochina, for instance, in Vietnam, in North Africa. The guillotine was the default method of execution for the French Empire until there wasn't a French Empire anymore. And many of the successor states that grew up in its aftermath also used the guillotine. One final bit of trivia for you as we wrap up. The warehouse, the San Jose factory where the mobile suit is being repaired, its design is completely identical to the warehouse factory from 0080 War in the Pocket, where the Cyclops team hides out and builds their Kempfer. Victory just loves reusing set dressing. Well, this is the halfway point of Victory Gundam, so this week, instead of doing research, we're going to take a step back and talk a little bit about our thoughts on the show so far, in more of a comprehensive kind of way. I have a list here of topics that we're going to talk about: characters, mecha, story, themes, and production, although I cannot guarantee that we are going to get to all of those, because I think really we could do a whole episode on this. Maybe we could do several episodes. We could just talk forever about Victory Gundam. But we're going to cut ourselves off, we're going to be efficient, and we're going to try to keep to just a couple of key points.
To some extent, we spend every episode reassessing Victory and where it is and where we think it's going. But especially on these longer series, it feels worthwhile at the halfway point to kind of step back and try to look at the whole first half together.
Especially because, as we have seen over the years, often these shows are not planned out all the way in advance. Often they are planned out one core at a time or one or two core at a time. So it may very well be that the midpoint or the quarter mark or the 1/3 mark represent real shifts in the intentions of the people behind the show. With all of that in mind, let's get into it. And I think we're probably going to end up comparing it a lot to prior Gundam, because that's kind of what this project is about. We're comparing the Gundam we're watching now to what we've already watched, what we expect from it. And at its core, every one of these Tomino Gundam series has been about one young boy who obtains the power of the Gundam, and then what it does to him and what he does with it. And for us in Victory, that's Uso. Personally, I find Uso to be a bit of a weird protagonist compared to the others that we've encountered so far. He's far less dynamic. He has developed less, I think. He is sort of psychologically, as a character, very close to where he began. He's kind of been learning the same lesson over and over and over again throughout the whole series, but really just the one. And that's, you can't do everything yourself. Learn to trust the people around you, learn to rely on them, learn to communicate with them. But by this point in the show, Amuro had had a complete breakdown, abandoned the white base, come back. Camille had been through a lot, Judo had been through a lot. Their attitudes, their behaviors had changed dramatically from the way they were introduced. But Uso remains that kid from Causarelia in a lot of ways.
But he has been learning and changing. Those changes have been more gradual. It can be hard to depict a character as closed off and then opening up in a sort of gradual and naturalistic way. In movies and TV shows, this often happens in sort of a big revelatory way that works in a fictional narrative, but we all understand as a vast sort of speeding up and exaggeration of the actual process by which a person does that. I also can't help but wonder if it's simply meant to reflect the children of the times, or rather adults' impression of the children of the times. In earlier Gundam series, and in particular in First Gundam, they were depicting people they knew. Maybe not peers, but not all that distant from their own ages, their own selves.
Mm-hmm.
This is almost 20 years later, and they are middle-aged men, many of them, depicting their children, who they feel a pretty strong sense of alienation from. Their children who have grown up in a vastly different world, a vastly different Japan. They're trying to connect with a generation that they freely admit, at least in a lot of interviews, they don't really understand. And if their impression of that generation is of a sort of deadening or of being cut off, of having really high walls such that people don't see the turmoil, whether you're experiencing it or not, that would account a lot, I think, for that kind of stagnant feeling you get around Uso.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. But on the other hand, we've seen remarkable growth from, of all people, Odello. Perhaps the single character who has changed the most in the course of the series. Besides Katajina, but we'll get to her. Odello has come from this hungry wolf kind of background where he's not attached to anybody outside of his immediate group of Susie and Warren. He's not really committed to the Ligue Militaire. He's just looking for a good place to sneak away from the camion, to find someplace with shelter and food. And he was constantly getting into fights with Uso as they were butting heads. He's grown into a good friend, a good leader, a really caring person who is truly devoted not just to his friends, but also to the cause.
Odello is also older than Uso. This is hopping topics a little bit, but one of the main themes that I see in Victory Gundam is this theme of the difficult, confusing transition from childhood to adulthood, both in how you behave, how you are expected to behave, and in how people treat you. And Uso is attempting to navigate that, and from him we see both attempts to be more adult and more responsible and moments of childishness. And at least in this first half of the show, I see the depiction of his struggle between those two as more important than any sense of, like, character development. Odello's a bit older. Odello is a bit further along in this process. Maybe it's easier to change when you're not already dealing with a big life change.
And not for nothing, a lot of the big changes in Odello's character have come after they met the other Highland kids, who have given Odello both connections to the larger world, people he cares about outside of his immediate circle. They've given him a crush, which can be a major catalyst for growth. He wants to be better than he has been so that he can impress Alicia. But that's not all of it.
And he has a group of peers who he respects and who respect him. And feedback from your peers, and advice from your peers, their opinions are going to weigh more heavily than those of the adults.
And during the sort of camion arc of the show, before they met the Highland kids, Odello didn't exactly have any role models. There weren't really any characters who were just a little bit older than him. There were the old men, there were the Shrikes, there were a bunch of like full-on adults. But now he's met Tomasz, who is either a little bit older than him or the same age but more mature. And while there hasn't really been the rivalry between the two of them, the romantic rivalry over Alicia that was kind of hinted at in that first episode, I think Tomasz has given Odello a model to strive towards.
The biggest difference between the group of kids who are refugees and who came from Earth and the Highland kids is that I think you described Odello as kind of wolfish earlier. Not a total lone wolf, but his little mini pack was all that he felt connected to, all that he felt he was responsible toward. In some ways, the Highland kids have not suffered in the same way that the kids on Earth have. They haven't witnessed the same things, but they have had to suffer the consequences of the war. They were kidnapped from their families, but they are part of a community. Not just in that all their families lived together and all their parents worked together, they all worked together. They all display a sense of responsibility and of confidence in their own ability to contribute to what's going on and to take meaningful action.
And they create for Odello a society, which is to say, a group of people who can perceive him and his actions and judge him. When it's just him out in the wilderness with just a couple of intimates, then there's really no concern for how are your actions going to be perceived by others. But now he has the opportunity, really the obligation to be known, and that imposes a kind of pressure on you that can be motivating and can drive you to improve yourself or to think more about what you do and how you do it. I'm kind of reminded of how in a lot of mecha shows, as long as the main mecha, as long as the Gundam is very conventional and marketable, you can get weird with the other ones. So as long as Uso can be a stand-up A+ gold star protagonist, other characters can do more interesting stuff on the margins. It's part of the reason villains are usually more fun than heroes. It's why we liked Kai so much.
But you don't think there's anything remarkable in the vulnerability that Uso displays? In the transition from hiding his tears in the cockpit to sobbing into Marbet's chest as he mourns Peggy?
Oh, I think it's a very important development for him as a person.
But you don't think there's anything remarkable in showing that to an audience of 10 to 14-year-old boys and saying this is your protagonist?
Well, when you put it like that. But Uso is almost too good. Uso is hard to relate to as a 14-year-old boy, which obviously I'm not right now, but, you know.
You kind of sort of remember.
I kind of sort of remember. Uso is too good. He's good at everything, and he develops in all the right ways. It hasn't felt like Uso has ever developed any self-sabotaging, maladaptive personality traits.
Except for the ones he started out with, more or less.
Exactly. He started out with some, but he's mostly been going through a steady process of shedding those, which makes his character development feel kind of trite and storybook. Amuro and Camille started out pretty messed up, and then got more messed up by the events of the series. Judo started out like happy-go-lucky, and then things got real for him. Uso started out a hyper-competent, courageous, creative kid whose primary flaw was that he was closed off and unwilling to talk to people and trying to do everything himself, and he's basically remained all of that while becoming more and more willing to show and share his feelings. In the main supporting cast, outside of Odello, who we've already talked about extensively, feel like there are just too many characters. Like, when was the last time we saw any of the old men from the Camion? When was the last time they got to do anything meaningful? How many lines has Ness had? How many lines has Khufu or Stryker had? It's a vast cast, and they're constantly adding new people to it, and yet, outside of a very small core of characters, there isn't much going on with any of them. And that's a shame, because some of them seem like they'd be pretty cool. I sure would like to learn more about the Shrike team besides their names and how much Uso treasures them. The lesser antagonists over on the Zanskar side have basically the same problem, outside of Chronicle and Katajina, and then to a lesser degree, Farah, who is...
Well, Farah was one of the more interesting ones, and now she's gone.
Right. Pippi Niden has a unique design and really seemed like he was setting up for something interesting and then vanished.
Well, then we left Earth behind, right? And that was,
Right.
he had been sent to kind of clean up Farah's mess.
Duker Eek, would love to see some more of him, but he is also...
And his teal-haired second.
Yep. And the ever-ejecting Lupe.
That's right.
The road trip nature of the plot, the necessity of leaving Earth to go into space and leaving behind all of those established antagonists and trading them in for the much less interesting Tassilo and Godwald Hein and whoever else, numerous unnamed characters. We did at least get the Sandoge out of it. But the core rivals, Chronicle and now Katagina, they are interesting. There, we're getting some real development. Chronicle increasingly turning towards the dark side. That initial impression we got of him as the prince who is a little bit snooty but working hard to make a name for himself on his own, trying to get out from under the burden of his royal pedigree, that has mostly given way to this
scheming courtier.
Yeah. With his own secret agenda, with his increasingly evident hatred for this young boy, and now with Katagina at his side, our new Char. Her debut at the end of this episode really pulled it all together for me on her. I was deeply skeptical of that character, and now I am fully on board.
I already explained in the talkback my reservations about the Katagina character as written. The problem you and I run into, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is that, at least as you're talking about it in this show, for you, good characters change. They can't just be interesting and then stay interesting by dint of staying as they were. They have to demonstrate some kind of change over time, or that the events of the show have an effect on them. And if they don't, you're like, oh, that's not a good character then.
I mean, that
Marbet.
Certainly is a very good synthesis of everything I've been saying today, yes.
I think Marbet's a great character, but she has not significantly changed since the show began.
I agree with that. I think a character who is interesting enough on their own doesn't need to change, but change can make a character interesting if they're not there already.
Okay.
I think Junko is a great character. I don't think Junko has changed very much. I think Junko is interesting enough on her own for the role that she inhabits. If she were the main character of the series, that'd be a different matter. But for what she needs to do, she's great. Ditto Marbet. There were even some moments when I thought Oliver might have risen to that level, but he's one of those characters who, after a strong start, has just been shuffled out the side door.
Relegated to the background.
And it kind of seemed like that was happening to Katagina, too. She was a big presence in the series for the first 10 episodes or so, then a very minor one until just now. But that's actually kind of what happened to Char in First Gundam. He was a big presence right up until episode 11, then he disappears completely and returns to action in episode 26. Just like Katagina. And not to belabor the point, but part of what makes Char so much fun is that he has an agenda. He has a rational agenda and a master plan, and then he also has this growing compulsion, this obsession with defeating Amuro that completely consumes him, and his actual agenda, his mission, largely falls by the wayside. And it seems like that might be happening to Katagina too. Whatever her actual plans for herself and her goals are, there's some psychological compulsion that is driving her at this point. And I don't fully understand it yet, but I hope to. Or perhaps she cannot be understood.
Do you think that the show is going to develop Katagina in a way that makes her more understandable, that explains these things? Or do you think she's going to remain the irrational woman, weird cipher?
I think probably it's going to chart a middle course where she becomes fascinatingly alien.
Because that's how all women seem to you guys, right? Fascinatingly alien?
Well, I mean, women are from Venus and men are from Mars, so by definition, I guess they are all aliens. Let's put a pin in this one. But it is a good, smooth transition to one of Victory's major themes, which is gender. Like, there's a lot of gender stuff. Gender and motherhood.
This whole thing reeks of gender.
At one point in a quote, Tomino described Victory. I've said this before, but Tomino said Victory was about women and soil, which I'm choosing to interpret as gender and environmentalism, because those are the main themes that I've picked up on. Gender, environmentalism, and charismatic leaders and devotion to religion. The three themes of Victory Gundam are environmentalism, gender, charismatic leaders, and growing up.
I mean, in some ways, it's Moon all over again, right? Women are the earth, and we need to return to the old ways, and... I mean, it's fine, whatever.
Right. I mean, and remember that, the Cubile takes its name from the mother goddess, who is like exactly that, the chthonic earth goddess.
A bloodthirsty populace driven by their desire to protect a woman who is driving herself to the brink of illness, to give herself to the people, her children.
To nourish them with her motherly energies.
It just occurred to me as we were talking about characters, Uso, from being very driven by the desire to find his parents, hasn't mentioned to them in episodes. It's like they have become an irrelevance.
It's true. The last time they came up was when he met Jin Jahanam and was very disappointed, because it was then implied that he kind of thought maybe Jin Jahanam was his dad. Apparently not. Although perhaps...
Hey, maybe one of the Jin Jahanams is his dad. We don't know. Is there even a real Jin Jahanam? I'm Jin Jahanam. I'm Jin Jahanam. I'm Jin Jahanam, and so is my wife.
Yeah, the false Jin Jahanam, the Kagemusha, the shadow Jin Jahanam, how does that fit into the overall theme of people following these charismatic leaders down dark paths?
Well, the dark reading, and I think probably the most accurate, is that all charismatic leaders are ultimately fakes. All of them are in some way a pretense, designed to take advantage of and manipulate your emotions.
And as a front for less charismatic but much more practical people behind the scenes, I don't think Maria is an absolute monarch, but even an absolute monarch, even a tyrant, is really only the face for an institution, an organization, a set of ministers and enforcers and local potentates, a reciprocal arrangement of power.
And as you brought up environmentalism earlier, just as a charismatic leader who inspires love is not necessarily worthy of that, doesn't necessarily deserve it from people, people fighting over a piece of land doesn't mean they care about it either. Both of these things, as depicted in Victory, are frequently more about exploitation of a resource than they are about actual care for some kind of underlying condition or about trying to improve things or make the world better, either for the environment or for people.
We saw the environment getting wrecked willy-nilly when they were on Earth, and in space, it's striking that several times now, Uso has been much more concerned about the safety of the colony than have been those who are nominally its defenders and citizens.
And think about the number of battles that have taken place in the midst of the debris of previous battles, in the midst of massive amounts of space junk, that we went and destroyed the Earth, and now we are doing the same to space. We are cluttering up space with garbage.
Fought over the theoretical idea of Earth, the spiritual icon that is Earth, has very little regard for Earth as a physical place with an environment, with ecology.
And I'm still not even clear why Zanskar wanted Earth in the first place. I'm not really clear on what exactly their end goal is here, other than their own independence and the creation of like an empire. What was their problem with the Federation? I don't know. You mentioned a disregard for the Earth as an environment, as a place, and similarly a disregard for the colonies as that, which actually made me think of things like vaccination programs or the hole in the ozone layer. Things that were horrifying problems that humanity solved and then promptly shockingly promptly, people forgot how bad the problem had been and take for granted the conditions that the solution created. We take for granted that people are not dying of measles. They used to. We take for granted that, oh, I don't really have to worry about the hole in the ozone layer. But that's because a bunch of governments banned the chemicals that caused it for long enough that it repaired itself.
Right, or the Y2K bug, or... Yeah, there are lots of examples of this.
And enough time seems to have elapsed in the universal century that people have forgotten one of the ostensible reasons that so many humans were moved off of Earth in the first place.
In general, I think Victory's portrayal of the universal century betrays a deep cynicism about international cooperation, about the UN. In the 1970s and the 1960s, I think there was a lot of optimism about the UN, about a one-world government, about the end of big wars between nations, and that kind of thing. 20, 30 years on, it had become clear that the UN was not, in fact, going to prevent wars, was not going to prevent genocides, was not going to prevent these kinds of issues. And while it has been a vehicle for international collaboration in some regards, things like the hole in the ozone layer, climate treaties, its powers are very limited. And that's the version of the Earth Federation that we see in these late 80s, early 90s era Tomino projects.
Yeah, it's frequently brought up that if the Federation could will itself to do so, if it could sort of rally itself, it could probably have taken care of Zanskar quite easily a long time ago. And it is a certain amount of like dithering that prevents them from doing so, not an inability, a lack of will, a lack of organization. And gee, why would people be feeling that way about the UN in the early 90s? That is one of the big research things that is going to get tackled in the second half of this season.
Yep. Tomino has, in fact, said or suggested in interviews that Maria and her role in Zanskar society was somewhat inspired by Tito in Yugoslavia, the single charismatic leader who can hold together all of these disparate groups.
There has been very little religion in Gundam, and when it is depicted, it's either weirdly backward or evil.
Tell us how you really feel, Tomino. That's basically everything we wanted to talk about except the mecha. So on that, I will simply say the Gwigzy is good. We should have more Gwigzy. We should maybe get rid of the mobile suits. All Gwigzys.
Except for the Sandhoj. I finally get my non-humanoid mobile suit.
See, we're both getting something we want out of this show.
I have been thinking a lot about where I think the show will go from here. The most obvious next step being that our Lean Horse Jr. team need more allies around them. And whether that is them linking up with more of the Side 2 alliance, or if that's going to be local, if it's going to be discontented people in Zanskar's capital, or whether it's going to be Federation forces back on Earth, I really don't know. It sort of feels like ideally they would somehow bridge all of these groups to work together to overthrow Zanskar. But that sounds really complicated and difficult to handle in the show in a way that isn't just them running all over creation, handshaking their way into alliances. There remains a tension between Shakti and her biological mother that I think will be resolved in some way, though I really don't know yet whether that's going to be Shakti outright rejecting Maria and what Maria represents, or some kind of in-between, not total acceptance but not total rejection. I don't think it's going to involve Shakti wholeheartedly embracing, like, yes, you're my mother now who I love and I'm happy to be your heir. Especially because I absolutely believe that if Shakti's not dead by the end of the series, she is going back to Earth.
I know just enough about what's coming that it would not be fair for me to speculate.
I sort of figured.
But I think those are some good predictions, and we'll see where the show takes us. That's all for now, and we'll be back in about a month to pick up the story with episode 27. Take care, y'all. And don't forget to send us your questions, your thoughts, and your theories about Victory while we're on break. Mobile Suit Breakdown is written, recorded, and produced by us, Tom and Nina, in scenic New York City, within the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape people, and made possible by listeners like you. The opening track is Wasp by Misha Dioxin. The closing music is Long Way Home by Spinning Ratio. The recap music is Slow by Lloyd Rogers. You can find links to the sources for our research, the music used in the episode, additional information about the Lenape people, and more in the show notes on our website, GundamPodcast.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email hosts@GundamPodcast.com or look for links to our social media accounts on our website. And if you would like to support the show, please share us with your friends, leave a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts, or support us financially at GundamPodcast.com/Patreon. You can find links and more ways to help out at GundamPodcast.com/support. Thank you for listening. There are a lot of wrong Gundam opinions out there corrupting the fandom, like this one from Draconic Dak, who says that all mobile suits should now be categorized and judged by the question of whether the boots can shoot. Most Gundams fail this test, but the Victory does get half a point for having a hard point that can mount a functional beam rifle, and another quarter point because while the boots don't shoot, it can shoot its boots.
Now I'm imagining a version of the Boots Cats video, but adapted for Gundam. So every time they say boots, it's the boots from the Victory. Every time they say cats, it's Cats Kobayashi.
That was a perfectly timed meow from Tigress right there. Cats? You talking about cats? I have some opinions on cats.
Boots, cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boot-wee, 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 boot-wee.
Would the bee be the Shako in this case?
Unless there's some other bee in Gundam that is better suited.
Well, there is the Bee Gundam. I don't know if the Bee Gundam is a spoiler at this point. I forget when that manga is from. The Bee Gundam is a ball that someone has put a Gundam head on.
Ha! Okay, except now I need to do a custom paint job on a ball to make it look like a bee. I have to give it little bee stripes and little bee wings.
Alright, so the Bee Gundam did not appear until 2003, I think, maybe 2004. So, forget I said anything.
Doing a little online shopping while I wait for you.
Oh no.
It's alright. I was looking through the stuff from last year to see if there was anything that I might want to get this year that is still available. Not much. Some of the new lineup, perhaps, but yeah.
Maybe we should pay you to talk about them on the podcast.
That would be fun. I would happily talk about and post about stationery. I actually already did that once. I was talking about trying to reignite my Japanese studies by getting some new stationery.
Nina, ready to sell out to Big Pen.
Tom doesn't. I mean, they do make pens, but that's not their primary thing. That's not their thing.
I constructed a little fortress of solitude for the cat under the dining room table. And when she goes under there, I will usually put a little bowl of food just outside, just a foot or two away from her nest that I built under there for her. And it's always really funny because when I put the food down, every time, invariably, her reaction is like, ugh, what's that? Food? Gross. Get away from me, loser. I don't like food. And if I walk away and then come back a couple of minutes later and just peek in, she's always crawled out of her fortress to eat the food.
She wouldn't want you to think that you're doing her any favors, right?
Right.
Like, she can't let this go to your head.
She doesn't want to come across as thirsty.